In the early years of the Atlantic War, German U-boats ruled by instinct and adrenaline. When sonar pings echoed through the steel hull, the order was always the same. Alarm, Tauchen, dive fast, crash hard, vanish before the depth charges arrived. Commanders were trained to hurl their boats downward like a stone. Planes were flooded, valves screamed, gauges trembled. A Type VII could drop from periscope depth to 150 feet in less than 30 seconds, impressive, but lethal if done wrong. The ocean punished haste. The first patrols of 1940 and 41 told a grim story. Dozens of boats broke seals, warped frames, or lost trim control during emergency dives. Pressure hulls groaned beyond test depth. In the darkness, crews prayed the next creek wasn't the last. British escorts learned to listen. ASDIC and early sonar picked up the roar of diving ballast tanks, the churning propellers of a boat in panic. They laid their patterns accordingly. The Royal Navy's Type D depth charge carried 200 pounds of TNT. Near detonation could rupture plating or shear fittings. To dive fast was to make noise was to die. By 1942, Admiral Dernitz's headquarters in Paris began receiving disturbing trends. Boats that dove too quickly were being caught more often. Those that trimmed slowly held silence and leveled deep tended to return. But pride and training die slowly in war. The crash dive remained sacred ritual until lessons from the other side of the ocean, from American patrol reports in the cold Pacific trenches, began to suggest something different. Survival wasn't in speed, it was in control. When American submariners entered the Pacific in 1942, they brought with them the same reflexes the Germans had perfected: slam the vents, blow the tanks, dive fast, disappear. But the Pacific was deeper, the pressure greater, and the Japanese, unlike the Royal Navy, hunted by patience rather than haste. Early patrols of Gato-class boats like the Wahoo and Gudgeon revealed a flaw in instinct. Crews who crashed-dived found themselves plunging beyond test depth before the trim tanks could stabilize. The deeper they dropped, the more violently the hull flexed. Off Wewak in January 1943, Lieutenant Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton took the Wahoo down to nearly 400 feet to avoid a Japanese counterattack. O'Kane, his executive officer, recorded how the bulkheads quivered like tuning forks while the pressure gauges crept past safety margins. They survived, but barely. The Bureau of Ships reports later confirmed what men like Morton and O'Kane had felt in their bones. Every submarine had a critical rate of descent. Beyond it, hydrostatic pressure outpaced trim correction, turning a dive into a fall. It wasn't speed that saved a crew, it was precision. By mid-1943, under the guidance of Admiral Charles Lockwood at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. submarine force began rewriting doctrine. Dive drills slowed deliberately. Ballast control officers were retrained to pace the flooding of main tanks. Plainsmen learned to ride the bubble instead of chasing it. The results were stunning. Boats that once took 60 seconds to reach periscope depth now took 90, but they arrived silent, level, and alive. Japanese sonar Type 93 and later Type 95 was sensitive to the turbulence of diving screws. A boat that crashed dove broadcast its position like a drum. A boat that eased under the thermocline slowly and evenly disappeared into layers of warm and cold water. The lesson was brutal, but it stuck. The ocean was not impressed by panic. Every submarine that came home proved it again. The quietest descent was often the one no enemy ever heard. By the summer of 1943, Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the U.S. Submarine Force Pacific Fleet, had seen enough wreckage reports to recognize a pattern. Too many boats were being lost not in combat, but in panic. Bulkheads collapsed, gauges froze, and men died clutching the dive wheels. The enemy hadn't changed, the doctrine had to. Lockwood was not a theorist. He'd commanded submarines back when depth gauges stopped at 300 feet and no one dared test them further. Now he studied the data coming in from returning patrols, the Tang, the Wahoo, the Trigger, each surviving through restraint rather than reflex. At Pearl Harbor, he issued new guidance: take her down quietly, trust your depth, let her breathe before you run. It became the heart of a revolution few outside the service ever noticed. Training manuals were rewritten. Instead of crash dive, the term controlled emergency descent appeared in the margins of the 1944 submarine doctrine pamphlets. The new emphasis: gradual ballast flooding, precise trim control, and silent stabilization below thermal layers. Richard O'Kane, now in command of the USS Tang, turned this philosophy into practice. During an August 1943 patrol, Tang executed what the crew later called the slow fall, a deliberate descent to 580 feet while hunted by destroyers. O'Kane wrote that each foot of depth was a heartbeat and silence our only armor. The Japanese dropped 30 depth charges. None came close. Lockwood's office analyzed those logs and compared them with the Bureau of Ships' safety margins. Gato and Balao-class hulls, built from high tensile steel, were rated for 400 feet, but Lockwood knew their crush depths exceeded 900. He quietly authorized deeper dives under combat necessity, relying on the new doctrine of patience and precision to make them survivable. The shift was psychological as much as tactical. Commanders learned to resist the primal urge to flee downward. Instead, they orchestrated descents like engineers, counting valves, whispering corrections, letting physics fight for them. In time, dive slower became more than advice. It was survival theology, proven in the black silence of the Pacific, where one mistake meant implosion. Deep beneath the Pacific, every sound, every rivet, and every vibration mattered. The new doctrine of slow, deliberate diving wasn't born from superstition. It came straight from the steel itself. The Bureau of Ships by 1943 had amassed a trove of stress data on submarine hulls. Their reports spoke in the language of physics and survival. The Gato-class pressure hull, built from 7/8-inch high tensile steel, could withstand roughly 600 pounds per square inch of pressure at 400 feet, but the ocean doubled that at 800 feet. Beyond it, failure wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous. Principles of naval architecture, the engineer's Bible, called it critical instability. Once a curve in the hull flexed beyond its elastic limit, collapse propagated faster than a man could blink. But tests revealed a hidden margin. The real crush depth of most Balao-class boats was near 900 feet, nearly twice the official limit. That discovery redefined courage. Admiral Lockwood's office quietly coordinated with electric boat engineers and the Bureau's safety analysts. Together, they re-evaluated the test depth, no longer a wall of fear, but a guideline of discipline. A slow dive let the hull equalize stress along its full circumference, rather than slamming pressure unevenly into the bow. In essence, slowing down didn't just reduce noise, it strengthened the submarine by spreading the burden of the sea. Veteran officers could feel it in their bones. The hum of metal changed with every 50 feet. Rapid dives produced groans and sharp pings. Slower ones hummed like deep cello strings. Commanders learned to read those tones like a seaman reads the wind. In that quiet science lay a truth the textbooks never taught. Submarines didn't fight the ocean, they negotiated with it. Each valve turned, each gallon of water admitted was a conversation between man and physics. Dive too quickly and the ocean answered in kind. The new American standard, calm, silent, methodical, was soon noticed by their enemies. Japanese hydrophone operators reported ghost contacts that vanished mid-ping. They called them shadow fish. The Americans called it good engineering. By late 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy had grown desperate to crush the American submarine threat that was strangling their shipping lanes. Tankers burned across the South China Sea, and the once proud merchant convoys limped from port to port. So Tokyo ordered its anti-submarine forces to evolve fast. The Japanese began refining their weapons and sensors. The Kaigun Technical Department introduced the Type 95 depth charge, a heavier successor to the older Type 91. It carried nearly 330 pounds of TNT, a brutal improvement, and was fitted with depth settings reaching over 300 feet. Escort commanders were trained to set layered detonations, shallow, medium, and deep, but their greatest flaw remained detection. As David Evans and Mark Peattie note in Kaigun, Strategy, Tactics, and Technology in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Japanese sonar was narrow-band and suffered from false echoes in thermoclines. The moment an American submarine slipped beneath that temperature layer, its signature vanished like smoke in the wind. The U.S. submarine force learned to use that physics as armor. Dive too quickly and turbulence betrayed them. Dive too slowly and the escorts could adjust. But dive smoothly, letting ballast equalize, steering into the thermocline, and even the best-trained hydrophone operators lost the trail. One encounter off Formosa told the tale. The USS Trigger, hunted by 3 Japanese destroyers, began a slow, controlled descent under Commander Roy Benson. Instead of the chaotic hiss of a crash dive, the crew barely heard a ripple. The destroyers circled above for 6 hours, dropping 60 charges. Each blast rumbled distant, muted by layers of cold water. When the surface finally fell silent, Benson's men rose to periscope depth and found the enemy steaming away, blind and beaten. The Japanese improved their tactics, introducing pattern dropping and hydrostatic fuses capable of deeper detonations. But by then, American submariners had mastered a paradox: patience could outrun technology. A disciplined crew, trusting the steel and silence around them, could survive 1,000 pounds of explosives detonating overhead by doing nothing more than holding their breath and letting the sea absorb the fury. Each patrol turned this into unwritten law. The bravest commanders no longer raced to the bottom, they listened for it. By the final year of the war, silence had become the last armor of the submariner. The reckless dives of 1942 were gone, replaced by a disciplined ballet of valves, trim, and faith in physics. The German U-boat arm, once masters of the Atlantic, was learning the same lesson, but too late. Allied sonar and radar had turned the old crash-dive tactic into suicide. Survivors from the North Atlantic reported that diving too quickly created noise trails that escort captains could follow like breadcrumbs. By 1944, German flotillas began adopting the slower, controlled descent pioneered by their enemies. The American experience had proven the principle through blood and engineering. Theodore Roscoe's United States Submarine Operations in World War II recorded a stark statistic. Boats that maintained strict dive discipline had a survival rate nearly 40% higher than those that did not. It wasn't luck, it was evolution under pressure, both literal and moral. After VJ Day, the Bureau of Ships compiled its final report on submarine losses. Many destroyed boats showed signs of hull rupture from uncontrolled descents, implosions triggered not by enemy weapons, but by panic. Lockwood's reforms had come just in time to prevent many more. Post-war design carried the doctrine forward. The Tang class and later the nuclear skipjack models were built around principles born in those wartime depths. Reinforced hull geometry, trim automation, and dive training focused on pacing, not speed. Even in the nuclear age, with depths measured in thousands of feet, submariners still repeat Lockwood's quiet mantra, "Take her down easy." Richard O'Kane would later write that beneath the surface, fear could kill faster than depth charges. The men who survived weren't the boldest, they were the calmest. Patience had become a weapon. In the end, the story of the slow dive wasn't about machinery or mathematics. It was about human restraint, about learning that mastery of the sea demanded humility before it. As the last U-boats surrendered in 1945 and American submarines surfaced from their final patrols, one truth echoed across both oceans. In the war beneath the waves, silence, control, and discipline, not speed, were what kept men alive.